church. I lived on Birchwood though.
Yeah, so
church.
probably said it's not where I live. Okay, next person.
Hello everyone, my name is Jim. Do forgive my voice. I've got a heavy cold at the moment. I'm staying with Father Philip, who kindly invited me to stay at his monastery over the weekend. I was received into the Orthodox Church about 9 years ago now, after a brief period of being recovering. So,
Great.
I'm Josh. I was baptised when I was born into the Church of England. I've not really had a lot to do with Christianity since, unfortunately. So I would like to now.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ella. I'm I've never been baptised.
Great. We can put that right at some point.
I'm Subdeacon Gabriel. I like learning. And the last round of catechism, Father Philip never showed us a video on making icons. So
So you're going to come to all of it just to see that.
yeah.
Hopefully it'll work this time round. Okay, very good.
Hi, I'm Lee, christened Church of England as a baby. Always claimed to be sort of ecumenical, done some research in the last few years, been drawn to the Orthodox Church.
Okay, there we go. Right, let's begin. So, today what we're going to do is have a look at the Bible. Know what it is, what it contains. So it's really a very, very basic thing. Just to get everybody off the grounds. Know how to look up a particular passage within the Bible, and then I'm going to encourage you to read Mark's Gospel. Okay? So the main part of this lesson is reading Mark's Gospel at home. Normally what we do, we start off on this page here, and you'll see at the bottom, in the middle, it says, this is actually written for self-study. So we normally say this prayer here to begin with, and the Lord's Prayer at the end. So we'll follow that prayer from now on, just like that. Okay? We're going to look at the Bible. The particular copy we're looking at is the Orthodox Study Bible. This is for a good reason, which I'll explain to you later on. And if you've got one in front of you, that's great. We've got one more copy. If anybody needs to borrow one. Is that this? There's one here.
I haven't
Use that one there. You can use that one. Okay. It's your honey and lemon if you dare to be ill after all of this. This is what we find in our parish. Okay. So, I'm not really making an apology for it being straightforward and simple. Every lesson, in a sense, is going to be simple if you already know what it contains. Okay? If you don't know what it contains, then it's obviously learning new things. And I hope you're going to find that you are going to be learning new things. So, first of all, we have a Bible. So, what in fact is a Bible? What's the Bible? And it is? What is it?
both New and Old Testament.
New Testament. But basically what is it? It's a collection of books. So if you open it up and have a look through any old prayer, just to leaf through it, you'll see that it's got different headings along the top. So I'll just emphasize it says Deuteronomy, here it says Exodus, back here it says Judges, back here it says Four Kingdoms, Nehemiah, Psalm, Wisdom Syriac, Zechariah, Jeremiah, Matthew, Luke, and so on, all the way through. And it's worthwhile just saying to yourself, well, what are each of these things? What constituted a book at that point? And sit down. You've made a start. You've got a Bible? Then open it. And originally what happened was that each of these books was a scroll. So you'd have a scroll like this, and you can open it up. with writing on it. So, there's a big problem with the scroll. That is, you can only write on one side of it. Okay, that's obvious, isn't it? You write on the inside of it, you scroll along, and you find yourself, that's why it's called scrolling along, and you scroll along, you find a new place and so on. And then a very clever thing happened in the Middle East. So if I draw out roughly the Middle East, so there's Egypt, this is the Sinai Peninsula, here we have the Mediterranean, so Cyprus is somewhere up here, and here you have a little country called Lebanon, with Beirut here, and Tripoli up here, and roughly halfway between the two, there's a little town now called Jabil. Jabil used to be called Byblos. And in Byblos, they decided they had a really clever idea, somebody did. That is, you take the scroll and you cut it up, and you sew along one side of each of the pages that you've now got. You can now write on both sides of the paper, which means you've doubled the amount of writing material that you had before. There's such a good thing to say, well, I'm going to get one of those inventions from Byblos. Oh, what invention are you going to get? I'm going to get this one. It's going to be called the Holy Thing from Byblos, or the Holy Bible. So the word Bible itself comes in this place, Jabil now, it's called Byblos before. Okay? And if you look at the word Bible, you can see it's called word Byblos within it. And in Greek it would be Iagia, Byblos, which means the Holy Bible, the Holy Book. So the word Bible itself basically means the invention from Bible, from Byblos, book. Okay, so far so good? Okay. So you could then, these scrolls were very long, very unwieldy, and you'd have to have shelves and shelves of them. Each shelf would have its own scroll within it. But suddenly you could write very finely, have very thin paper, and put all the scrolls into one volume. And that is exactly what happened. So it is a book, but it's actually a library. So all of these 44 books would have been quite a shelf full of library. So that's a brilliant thing about that. Okay, so far so good? Have a look through it. And you can just tell me what we discussed. Spoil things, please. Now they're looking through. Matthew and Clara are going to introduce themselves to everybody else.
Oh yeah.
And you're going to have to work out what everybody else's names are. Okay?
That's okay, we'll do that. So, my name's Clara. I've been coming to the Orthodox Church since literally the first day of this year, the night of the New Year. Yes, that's about me. I'm half Romanian, half Persian. Just an interesting background.
How about for you? I was in Lincolnshire, I work in horticulture. Being a Christian since 2018.
Very good. Work in horticulture. I didn't know you worked in horticulture.
Yeah, that's it. I do most of a lot of the driving.
Okay. So you're not actually growing stuff?
Oh, sorry.
You're not actually growing stuff?
Well, sometimes I do bake if they get a bit desperate for work. I do a bit of growing.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Right. So in front of you, you've got a Bible. And there are lots of things you might notice about it. Some of them just sort of state the obvious. What do you notice? If you look at the Bible, what do you notice? Turn to your page. What do you notice?
It's divided into chapters and verses.
It's divided in chapters and verses. There's something quite interesting about the chapters and verses. In the Old Testament, they tend to be roughly, not always, but roughly 30 verses long. Any idea why they might? Each verse is basically a sentence or a part sentence. Why 30 verses?
Can I have a guess?
Yeah,
Is it because Christ started his ministry when he was 30?
that's a wonderful guess, and it's not not
Oh.
correct.
Okay.
Okay, a really nice guess.
Mm.
Funny enough, that's what Mia said yesterday as well.
Okay.
So, any other good guesses? I know stupid answers. There's one right answer, right-ish. But,
Can I have a second guess?
yes,
Is it because of the moon cycle, the way it's like 30
No.
days in a month now?
that's a great guess. Equally drivel, but never mind.
Mm.
No, it's just quite simply the size of the sheet of paper you could get. So what they'd do is they'd start at the top, write down one, it's a sheet of paper one, and then write down roughly 30 sentences. You got to the end of that page, turned over two, carried on writing. And basically those things actually stayed there. So you find some interesting things. So in Genesis chapter 1, the natural chapter ends in chapter 2 verse 3. But chapter 2 starts obviously at verse 1, and the first few verses that belong to the story before that. Then you go on to the second story. It's just simply, you have a piece of vellum, which is made out of the back of a piece of sheepskin, or goat skin, or calf skin, and that's how much you can actually write in there, with a big, thick, unwieldy bill pen. Okay, later, when they're able to write more things in the New Testament, then you've got smaller pages, and you've got much more written on them, so up to 60 odd sentences per chapter. Okay, so completely crazy thing. So you mustn't think about the chapters as being the same as the chapters in a book, a novel or something. You read one chapter, then you have a new thought, and you go on to the next chapter. You have a new thought, you go on to the next chapter. And the Bible is not set out in that manner. Okay? Okay? Anything else? Well, we said about chapters and verses. So if it's possible you've never done this before, but if you look at anything, you'll see there's a big number. Like here, there's a big number. And then there are lots of little numbers spread out all the way through it. And there'll be another big number, lots of little numbers and so on spread through it again. And then up the top here, this one here says Joshua 7:14. So this means it's this first verse here is Joshua chapter 7 verse 14. Then over here it says Joshua 9:6, which means the last verse is Joshua chapter 9 verse 6. So that is the span of these two pages here. So it's a good way to look up a particular sentence. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, there are other very obvious things about it, which you might be able to see if you just look at the clean and dirty pages of my Bible. This is my Bible. You see there's any difference between the clean and dirty pages? So which are the dirty pages? The New Testament, yeah. So you've got the New Testament and the Old Testament. So obviously pretty well there. So you've got Old Testament this side, New Testament on this side. So what does testament mean? Testimony, which means
Instruction.
not
Account.
instruction, not account. Witness. So you go to court, you have seen something, and you bear witness. So a little while ago, I had to go to court. Somebody called me as a witness. I went to court, I had to tell the judge and the jury what I had seen. Okay? And that's called bearing witness or bearing testimony. The word testimony itself is quite an interesting word, which I'm not going to go into, but it's how you used to bear witness. Is you would place your hands between the knees of somebody else, and you would tell them directly, this is what I saw, or this is what I believe. Their testimony, whatever it was. So you've got two testaments here, the old one and the new one. This is basically the old Jewish book, okay? Or series of books, series of scrolls. Not all Jews use all of these books. And then this section here is the Christian addition to the Jewish book. Okay? The basic Jewish books are the first 5 within the Bible. So, those are Genesis, Exodus, what comes next?
Leviticus.
And then
Israel. No.
Deuteronomy and
Deuteronomy.
Numbers.
Numbers. Okay? So those 5 are called the Pentateuch or the Torah. And those are the main ones in any Jewish synagogue. If you go to a synagogue, they'll have a special, they call it an ark at the front, it's like a cupboard. They open up the cupboard, they take out the scrolls, and often there are 5 scrolls, but there might just be 1. And that would be the Pentateuch or the Torah. And the Torah is handwritten and is worth about the same as a decent house. Okay, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds. So
This is what, is this how much a Bible would have cost?
The Bible would have been the most expensive thing in the city, because it had been handwritten at one point, which is why it is, even nowadays, we cover them with a special cover, they are paraded through the church and so on. That's one of the most valuable things the church owns. Whereas you could knock up a chalice in an afternoon, writing a Bible would take 2 or 3 years. So it was carefully looked after, usually by a deacon, who would then carry it into church, which is why the deacon still carries it in church. And it became, you put icons on the outside of it, and depending when you were using it, like Matins and Sunday, then the icon of the resurrection is facing the people. And that then became, is that for me? Thank you very much. And that then became the symbol of the resurrected Christ amongst his people. A very valuable thing. And often therefore, because his words themselves were terribly valuable, the cover reflected that. But the cover made out of silver, gold, carved, jewels and stuff, was worth less than the book inside it. So quite frequently you'll find the book has survived and the cover has not. And somebody's melted down the cover, that's fine, we'll get another one of those. But the book itself is enormously important. Okay? Well, some kind of book else or something. The original cover's gone a long time ago, but the inside of it still remains. So yeah, so you've got a whole series of books divided into basically 2 sections, Old Testament and the New Testament. Happy so far? So the Old Testament, what is it? What's it basically do?
Well, the witness before, Jesus.
Quite right, a witness before Jesus Christ. Some of it is actually pre-Jewish. So there are some psalms that predate Judaism. Can't think of a particular psalm at the moment. There are some psalms that are actually found on the inside of Egyptian tombs that are older than Judaism. So those presumably are ones that they learned in Egypt and brought with them into the Holy Land. There are some stories, like for instance the first 2 chapters of Genesis are extremely old. The first chapter of Genesis probably 15, 20,000 years old. Okay, Stone Age story. That's come down to us now. And we need to think about it in that sort of manner. The Stone Age witness to the grandeur of God is telling us something about God, not necessarily scientifically, but it's telling us about God, the why is the world like it is, and how did it come like that. Chapter 2 criticizes it. It's probably 10,000, 12,000 years younger than the first chapter. And we don't really know when a lot of these things were written. And we think probably the first 5 books of the Bible were actually written down in the time of King David as one continuous thing. So that's about 1,200 years before Christ. But parts of those are much, much, much older than that. Some of the Psalms already said. Some of them are Egyptian Psalms that have come into Judaism, into the Hebrew way of thinking about it. Some are written by King David, some are written by other people, and if you look through carefully, it often tells you who wrote this. It says the Psalm of David, and the Psalm of somebody else, and then tells you the name of the person who wrote it, Asher or something. Okay? So a whole series of different backgrounds to them. Sometimes you get different sources of different stories, and these are then woven together to make a complete story. But the Jewish people didn't want to discard anything, so sometimes you get contradictory stories, but side by side, even interwoven with each other. A little bit like if police interview two different people about one thing that happened, each person says something different. Because this one's standing over here, that one's standing over there, it's all different things. And in the Jewish mind, they realized that was the case. So this person's witness and that person's witness, both good. Put them both together, and that gives a sort of a width of understanding you otherwise wouldn't have had before. Okay? So you come across contradictions, things like that, don't worry about it. It's exactly the same as police statements you get as well. Okay? So far so good? Anybody learnt anything? Yeah. That's always good. Yes. Nodding your head sagaciously, that's nice. So, as Matthew just said, the Old Testament deals with revelation of God from the beginning until the coming in the flesh of Jesus Christ. And then the New Testament, what is that? What's the New Testament? Yeah.
The witness after Christ was born, and obviously his ministry and his resurrection,
Uh-huh.
and his ascension as well.
And his ascension, and the coming of the Holy Spirit, and then the workings of the early apostles. So particularly St. Paul, and it contains a lot of letters of St. Paul. Those are the main things in the New Testament. There are other bits and bobs as well, like letters of Jude, James, Peter, and the book of Revelation. But those within the church have a lesser, not lesser status, but they're less used than St. Paul, because St. Paul wrote an awful lot. Okay, and that's what got into the Bible. So far so good? The icons, by the way, that I put up here are also part and parcel of the whole business. So don't feel sorry about the fact you're actually looking at that sort of thing. Okay, so there we are. Right, let's have another think about the Old Testament. If you look through the Old Testament again, you'll find that even just the shape of some of the things you see there, you can see there's different types of literature going on. So some of it is written out like poetry. There are some things that are hymns and books of psalms. There's more poetry there. And then there are political statements and things which we call prophecy. There's history. There are rules, there are laws, there are instructions. So for instance, let us say you decide to read Leviticus or Deuteronomy, you'll find a huge amount of rules about how to do sacrifices. So how much attention do we spend on that nowadays, do you think? About exactly how to sacrifice a sheep. Don't listen, Johnny. They think you're a sheep. we spend hardly any time thinking about how to sacrifice sheep. Okay? And so that immediately you can see that different parts of the Bible now have different amounts of authority. Okay, it's clear just from that example, isn't it? So although you have one book, it's clear, one Bible, it's clear straight away. The different parts of the Bible have different amounts of authority. Some have a huge amount of authority, some have very little authority. So in here we've got the book of Maccabees. The book of Maccabees is a very interesting book, but actually it doesn't have much in the way of authority in the church. It's interesting and useful to have there, and it appears in the Jewish Bible, so we have it. But we don't go to the book of Maccabees very often to get theological statements from it. It's all about killing foreigners. Okay? Great fun and a fantastic read. And if you want to know how to use elephants in battle, then Maccabees is a really, really good book. But I dare say that not even Matthew here is going to go into battle with elephants very often. Okay? It might do, for all I know.
It's not impossible.
Not impossible. But if you read Maccabees, you'll see how to overcome an elephant in battle. Okay? Yeah, you tickle their tummy with a spear.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
And the elephant then doesn't like you, so decides to squash you. So it lifts up its legs, which means its tummy comes down upon you. And because you're tickling its tummy with a spear, the spear goes up through the elephant and kills it. It has an unfortunate consequence, the person holding the spear, of course.
Yes.
Because they also get squashed into the bargain. But
It's a silly way to kill an elephant.
it's not the best way of killing an elephant. There are other ways of doing it now, but that is how they used to do it then. You get somebody rather who is self-sacrificial, go out and meet the elephant and tickle its tummy with a spear. And then the elephant will kill you and in the process kill itself too. Okay? So it's quite interesting and a very good read, but it doesn't have much in the way of authority. We're not preaching about how to kill an elephant. Other bits as well have huge amounts of authority. So let us say you're going to read the book of Isaiah. That has a vast amount of authority. Or Micah, huge amount of authority. Or parts of Daniel, huge amounts of authority. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, even Numbers, huge amounts of authority. And although we're not learning how to do sacrifices anymore, if you want to know what we mean by the sacrifice of Christ, you do have to understand these sacrifices. So you have to read those and understand them and come to an understanding what the Jewish people meant by these sacrifices and why they did them. And then the sacrifice of Christ becomes illuminated by that. Okay, happy so far? Everybody happy? Everybody nodding their heads? Okay. Anybody want to ask any questions? No? Okay, good. Carrying on then. So, we said this really, and we can begin to, as I said here, how to look up a particular verse. Does everybody know how to look up a particular verse in the Bible? You probably don't? No? No problem there. So again, like I said earlier on, every single sentence is numbered. So, put my finger on that sentence there. So that is Exodus chapter 16, verse 7, which starts, "In the morning you shall see the Lord's glory." It's a rather good thing to put my finger on. It's rather good. Okay? And we can look up a particular verse. So here I put chapter 18, verse 2. So if in your one you turn to chapter 18. Doesn't help that my eyes are absolutely full of hay fever. And verse 2. This is Exodus, no wonder it doesn't say that. So Genesis chapter 18, verse 2. 18 verse 2 takes you to here, and it says, "So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men stood before him." And you can actually look up a particular passage within the Bible and tell somebody else where to look as well. Okay? And that means you don't have to have the same words on every page. And these ones here, they happen to be published by the same person, so the same words on the same page. But if you turn to page, 23 in the New English Bible or something, it'll have different words on it. It's interesting that in the Sikh book, the Guru Granth Sahib, then every page 23, in any copy of the Guru Granth Sahib, has exactly the same words on it, and every line has got exactly the same words on it as every other Guru Granth Sahib. Okay? So they've solved that problem in a different way. The Muslims have taken our way of numbering chapters and applied it to the Quran. Happy? So that's how to look up a particular verse. You might have chapter 18 verse 2 to chapter 19 verse 3, and that means that's the passage we're going to be reading. Okay? Happy with that? There's another interesting thing as well. The Orthodox Old Testament contains 49 books. If you turn to, I think it's page XIII, or 13 in old Roman numbers, you will see, this XIII, page 13, you'll see that there's a comparison between Orthodox, Catholic and Protestant Bibles. Now, the Orthodox Bible is rather like Allinson's bread. You know the adverb? It says not added, not taken away. So we have the complete, full fibre, full cream milk version of the Bible. Nothing's been added to it, nothing's been taken away from it. If you look at the Catholic one, it's got most of the Bible in there, but there are other books that are light and so on. And you look at the Protestant Bible, and you'll see that quite a lot of the Bible has actually been taken out. This is largely because Luther decided that anything in the Old Testament written in Greek should be taken out of the Bible, and he put that into a separate book, an appendix to the Bible, gave it no authority at all, and that then became called the Apocrypha, or the hidden writings. Okay, so they're taken out of it. And that includes things like certain wisdom literature and also the Maccabean Wars and that sort of thing, which were taken out because they were written in Greek rather than Hebrew. So they were post-Alexander the Great and his conquest of Israel. Okay? There is only, in the Orthodox Church, one version of the Bible that has canonical permission. And that is what's called the Septuagint. Anybody heard of the Septuagint? Anybody know what it is? I think Subdeacon Gabriel can enlighten us on this matter.
It says on the board, doesn't it?
Yeah, come on then. What does it say?
It's the original Testament, no?
70 scribes.
And 70 scribes, yeah. What happened was this, that when Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East, then general language of everybody stopped being the local language. Everybody started speaking Greek. So from eastern Spain, right the way through to Egypt and most of North Africa, everybody spoke Greek. Okay, at home, they might speak Latin or Aramaic, or they might speak, I don't know, some ancient Spanish version of Spanish, but everybody actually spoke Greek, everybody did. And the local languages, by and large, started being forgotten. They were quite as badly, actually, as in Palestine, the Holy Land, where Hebrew largely became a forgotten language. People would speak Aramaic at home, but out in the street you would speak to each other in Greek. Unless you're in a village, they might speak Aramaic to each other. But as soon as they need to do something formal, like pay their taxes or something, they'd speak to the taxman in Greek. They do that in Africa. A good example, where I lived in Zambia, there are 57 different local languages in Zambia, so everybody spoke to everybody else in English. And in the cities, nobody spoke the local languages, nobody, ever. You all spoke English. Out in the villages, they might speak Chitonga or Chibemba or one of the other ones, Chiluo, but as soon as you went into town, you spoke in English. And the original language of Hebrew became largely forgotten, except amongst certain academic people who were studying the scriptures in Hebrew. They spoke that Hebrew fluently. They also spoke Greek fluently. So they knew exactly what the Hebrew meant, and they knew exactly what the Greek would be, the Greek equivalent would be. That was very fortunate indeed, because they're able to translate the Hebrew into Greek. And there are 70 scholars that did this, and they ended up with an agreed translation of the Old Testament. They knew what the Hebrew was, they knew what the Greek was, they agreed with each other, this is what that means. And that is what then got published, and that is what was then read in all of the synagogues and everywhere else. They didn't read it in Hebrew. They might have had a Hebrew copy, unlikely, but they might have had one, but actually they read it in Greek. Okay? So when the Lord quotes from the Old Testament, we know that he quoted from the Septuagint version, because the Hebrew version is slightly different. We know that he does. So there are all sorts of times from the Psalms and from the prophets and so on, whenever he quotes, it's always from the Septuagint. Now, as far as the Jews are concerned, this is very helpful, because they then had to reinvent Hebrew when they took over parts of Palestine and Holy Land, and they were able to reinvent Hebrew because they knew what the Greek meant, and therefore they knew what the Hebrew meant, and therefore they could learn what the Hebrew meant. Okay? And the funny part is that scholars nowadays who are studying the Bible in Hebrew only know what the Hebrew means because it's translated into Greek. So they could more successfully just read the Greek. Okay, that's probably nearer to the original. Certainly an idea. Okay, does that make sense? So when the early church was trying to decide, okay, what is the Bible? One of the decisions they had to take was, what is the Old Testament? What is it? And they decided that this work that was done by the 70 scholars was a really good work, and after all, the Lord himself quoted from it, so that was the Old Testament. And the only version of the Old Testament that's allowed is that particular version. Okay, it's called the Septuagint. So all other translations from the Hebrew or anything else are actually not canonical. In English, there are one or two versions of the Septuagint, which is a direct translation from the Greek into English, and the Orthodox Study Bible is the most recent of those. There's also another one done by one of the monasteries in America, and one of our deacons in the Antiochian Church in York is also working through the Septuagint, translating from Greek into English as well.
Sorry, Father, I just have to run my house kit up to my dad.
That's right.
Took it without needing to.
It's not. They're all wondering what on earth to do. Okay, everybody happy with that? So, if you have a Bible that's not a direct Septuagint copy, then actually it's not authorized for reading in the Orthodox Church. So you can use it in the future for, I don't know, placemats or keeping beds from rocking. Don't do that. It's still a holy thing. Okay? So the purpose, the Old Testament tells us the purpose of God's creation, what it means to be a human being, what sin is about. It talks to us about the choosing of Abraham, which is the beginning of the salvation history, the giving of the law to Moses. How many commandments are there? No? Anybody know? It says there, actually.
That's it, I think it's behind you.
613 laws, 613 commandments, some of which are mutually exclusive. Most likely the poor Jewish people have such a difficult time keeping them. Okay, and the major and minor prophets. The word prophet and prophecy is often misunderstood by people as well. So, a prophecy and a prophet is often thought to be somebody who looks into the future. Okay, that's what it's thought to be. But a prophet and a prophecy is somebody who understands the present from the point of view of God. Okay? So they're able to say, thus says the Lord. They look around, see what's going on, and say, thus says the Lord. you are cursed, or you are blessed, or if you carry on like this, you're heading for oblivion. And usually the prophets have taken no notice of it. Okay? And then these prophecies, because they come from God in the end, they can be reused many times over. And actually, preaching is very much that sort of prophetic job. You take something that's there, and you then rework it with current people in front of you. So it may be an Old Testament reading, or New Testament reading, or Gospel reading, and the priest's job is to say, this is what I'm basing this on, this is the people I'm talking to, this is the sign of the times of the moment, what does this mean for the people now? And it's called redacting it, two different meanings of redacting. But this redacting is reworking something for the current time. So a good example would be Isaiah talking about Emmanuel. Time will come when the Virgin will give birth and will call the child Emmanuel, God is with us. He's talking to his king. He's saying, your wife will have a child, and when that child is born, you will see that God is with you. Things will have changed. The Assyrians will no longer be attacking you anymore. You'll be free. And then that particular prophecy for that time, several hundred years later, is then used again to refer to Christ. That actually this is now a worldwide experience. The Virgin will give birth, and when the child is born, we will say, Emmanuel means God is with you, God is with us. And we'll say, God is with us. Okay, makes sense? Jolly good. Between the Old Testament and New Testament, there's about a 450-year gap between the last prophecy of the Old Testament and the first prophecy, the first thing that happens in the New Testament. So from the book of Micah, about the star and about Bethlehem and so on, to the beginning of Luke, where the angel appears to Zechariah, there's a 450-year gap. That, if you think about it in our terms, takes us back to people like Queen Elizabeth I. So it's a long time for God to say nothing to anybody. And sick of you lot not saying anything more. Just wait and see what happens. Carry on doing what you're doing, you'll be fine. And then 450 years later, the angel appears to Zechariah, Father John Paul the Baptist, and tells him the good news. And what does Zechariah say? What's the effect of, I don't believe you. So, he gets punished by being made to be silent. Alright? Any questions so far? No? Okay. So, the New Testament, like the Old Testament, is made up of a series of books. Again, just like the Old Testament, different books have different amounts of authority. So, there are 4 books that have absolute authority. What are they called?
The Gospel.
The Gospels.
Yeah.
So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They have absolute authority. You'll find also that Acts of the Apostles has absolute authority as well. Then, as well as, so the 4 Gospels are theologies, they're not histories. They're theologies about Christ. They tell you about what the meaning of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is about. Why did he do this? And St. John actually says, I wrote this so you may believe, and in believing have eternal life. That's the purpose of them. Then Luke then carried on, he wrote another one called Acts of the Apostles. And it's actually mainly the Acts of St. Paul. And Luke is interested in taking the gospel from Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost to Rome. And he leaves us up in the sky in Rome. It finishes in a really odd way. He doesn't, so much detail beforehand. Then we arrive in Rome, and St. Paul is a prisoner in Rome, and St. Luke says about him, so he spent the next 2 years there paying for his own account. Okay? In his own home. Sick of this now, I'm not going to write another word. And it's a very strange way of ending that, but clearly it's deliberate, and he finishes it in a clear way. It's in Rome. We don't have anything more about the Acts of St. Paul. We do know that St. Paul must have been released after that, because he even appears in the tradition along the road here, near to the cathedral. About 3/4 of the way from here to the cathedral, there's a little knoll, and little St. Paul's is built there in memory of St. Paul having preached there. And if you go down the eastern side of Britain and the western side of Europe, you'll find that there is a complete tradition of St. Paul travelling up through the western side of Europe, the eastern side of Britain, until he reached the ends of the earth. That's here. And then he turned around and went back again, and returned to Rome, and that's where he was then beheaded. Okay?
Paul visited Lincolnshire.
Almost certainly, yeah.
Why?
Along with people like St. Simon Zelotes, who came to, probably almost certainly to Lincoln, but he almost certainly went to Caister, where there's a very strong tradition of him being there. And St. Simon Zelotes then went on into Yorkshire, thought better of it, and came back. Okay? And St. Andrew was keen to draw a huge cross over the entire earth. So he went up to Archangel, he went down to Great Zimbabwe, he went across east to Sogdiana, nowadays called Afghanistan, and having been to all these barbarous places, he chose one more, even more barbarous place. He travelled across to Scotland. Okay? And then he went to Ephesus, where he met his sticky end as well. Okay? And probably sent an epitaphium to Scotland, which has a tradition of him being buried in St. Andrews. It's more likely an epitaphium is buried there. St. Simon Zelotes is by tradition buried in York, but it's actually almost certainly an epitaphium, which means a cloth placed upon the tomb. Okay, happy? So, there are, whoops, what's wrong with you? Why are you complaining? I think we need to talk about this, we'll come on to this another time. It's running a shorter time. The Gospels themselves, they are put into a separate book, and they're placed on the Holy Table. They sort of put on the Holy Table here somewhere. And they are the,
Excuse me.
God bless you and keep you. I will do.
Excuse me.
Thank you very much. God bless you and keep you. And Charlotte.
Sorry, guys.
So they represent the presence of Christ amongst us. So they're always there, and usually during Matins, they're brought out for people to venerate on Sundays, and then placed at the back of church. And they represent Christ being amongst his people. The rest of the New Testament, we said something about this already. How the Acts of the Apostles said something about that already. They've got the letters of different apostles, mainly from St. Paul. Pretty well only St. Paul is read in church. The only exception to that is if it happens to be St. Peter, St. Jude, St. James Day, in which case one of their letters will be read as well. But usually it's just the letters of St. Paul, which is why it is the book that contains the letters of the church and read in church is not normally called the epistle book, it's normally called the apostle in the singular, meaning St. Paul's writing, his writing, the apostle.
So is epistle a letter?
Epistle means
And
letter.
apostle is the person who writes the letter?
Well, no, both the things you send. So you apostle and epistle.
Oh, right.
Okay, you send a letter. You apostle, send, and epistle, thing being sent.
Oh, I see.
Okay? So that's why they sound very similar, apostle, epistle. They're actually from the same root. And both mean to be something that's sent, or being sent, or something who's sending. So the apostles were people who were sent somewhere. So my bishop sent me to Lincoln. So I was apostled to Lincolnshire. Okay? I don't think I'm going to call myself an equal to the apostles though. But in that I was the first missionary to come to Lincolnshire, the Orthodox Church, for a very long time, 1,000 years or so, then I am the one who is apostled here. Okay, I was sent here. With the epistles, it's quite interesting because they usually don't tell you what the gospel is. They very frequently tell you what the gospel is not. So St. Paul will say, you've got all this wrong. You know, you don't do it like this, don't do it like this, don't do it. He doesn't say do it like this. He assumes they should know. And that's why it is we need to know what the tradition is generally, because the tradition of the church tells you what to do, and the apostles usually tells you what not to do. Okay, does that make sense? We're full of teaching, mind you, well worthwhile reading and so on. That leaves us with one book at the end that we tend not to read. So what book would that be?
Revelation.
Revelation, yeah, the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation nearly didn't get into the Bible at all. Got in by the skin of its teeth. There are lots of books that nearly did get in, so the ones that nearly got in are called this. There's the Didache, there's the letter of St. Clement, there's the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, 7 of them. There's the martyrdom of Polycarp, there's a letter of Polycarp, and there's the Didache, and there's another gospel book as well. All of which nearly got into the Bible, but didn't. They didn't because they decided that these were not written by the first witnesses, okay, the people who either were apostles or knew the apostles very well. So Luke gets in because he knows the apostles very well indeed. John gets in because he is an apostle. Jude gets in because he is an apostle, even though they actually discussed Jude and said, he didn't say anything, so why should we put it in? The third letter, James, barely says anything. Why does it get in? Because it's written by James. Does it contain anything we don't already know? No. Could we manage that? Easily. Okay? But the book of Revelation was written by John. And they discussed it and they said, well, pretty well everything that's happened that he's writing about is now no longer relevant. Because he was writing in a time of persecution. We're not being persecuted. The things he said would happen have happened already. And so we don't need to worry about that. He's writing in picture language. It was easily misunderstood, and so maybe it has been understood. And there are lots of Gnostics and others that used to like this more than any other part of the Bible, any other part of the Bible. So they thought, maybe we'll leave it out. And then people said, but it was written by James. So not James, written by John, therefore it must go in. And it has been a bit of a sore point actually ever since, because a lot of the heresies in the church have come from people misreading Revelation. But there it is. So it's never read in church, but it is mined for use in hymnody and services, and even in some liturgical practices. It's used for all of those things. Okay? So they just made it in, but it's never actually read in church. And usually spiritual fathers say to people, don't read it. If you read it, you're probably going to go wrong. Or if you're going to read it, then you have to read it with a commentary from somebody like St. John of Damascus or St. John Chrysostom or something like that. So you're understanding what the church means by it. But even they didn't think much of it. Okay? So we then come on to a really interesting thing. Who decided what the Bible is going to be? Because one of the funny things is, it did not fall out of heaven. It's one of them. Where did they come from? Council of Nicaea, the first three ecumenical councils. So here we have the bubs of the first ecumenical council, all sitting there. Got at the bottom there St. Spiridon, arguing with Arius. And in the corner there, writing busily away, is Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, who was so angry with Arius, he stood up and thumped him. Arius hit him back, broke his nose and his cheek. And bishops, this is later on actually, bishops so cross with him They deposed him for a bit, but anyway, you can see the skull. You can't see the skull, but they have seen the skull of St. Nicholas, now in Bari, in Italy, near the famous football ground. And you can see where Arius hit him, with a broken nose and a crack in his jawline, which shows that Arius was right-handed. Fortunately, you cannot see the damage on Arius because he was not a saint, so nobody enshrined him. So he, unfortunately, cannot see what he gave back. Now, it took 300 odd years, nearly 400 years, for the Bible to be settled as a document, as this. So, for all of that time beforehand, we did not have, catechism course.
Sorry for interrupting, what is Vespers?
Yeah, Vespers will be at 5.
Alright.
It's nice to see you. Huh?
Early.
You're a bit early.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. It's nice to see you. So, for all of this time, there was no Bible. So the Muslims always say about Christians, the Christians are people of the book. But they didn't have a book for nearly 400 years. That is manifestly not true. So Christians are people not of the book. The book is important, but what is more important is Christ. So we are people of Christ, not people of the book. We do not follow the book. We follow Christ. The book tells us a lot about Christ, but the book is part of the tradition that the Church has handed down in order to illuminate our understanding of Christ. But you don't actually need the Bible to follow Christ. And the Bible is not a series of instructions about how to follow Christ either. Okay? We follow Christ. Jesus said, follow me. He did not say, follow the book that you're going to write. Did he? So that's a very important way of understanding it. And the ecumenical councils, first 3 ecumenical councils, you can read their minutes if you want to. It's in the Rudder. You can find out what they decided to do, why they decided to do it, and what decisions they came to in the end. And it's the meetings of these 3 sets of bishops over 150 years that actually gives the Bible its authority. At the same time, they did something else that was really important. That was, they decided what the Church believed. And they wanted to produce a book that contained all that was necessary, but not everything that could be written. And they wanted to provide a document that would have the basic beliefs, but not everything you might believe. So the Bible is called one thing, and the other thing is the Creed. And next week we shall look at the Creed. Okay? But both the Bible and the Creed came out of the same meetings. So both of them, each of them illuminate the other. You understand the Creed better by reading the Scriptures. You understand the Scriptures better by reading the Creed. And they judge each other that way. Okay? Homework. It's always nice to have homework. I can see that Ella is a great fan of homework. Joshua is even more of a fan. I'd like you please to read Mark's Gospel. Okay? So if you look in, you know where Mark's Gospel is? So if you look in the New Testament, you'll find it on page 1000. 1329. It'll take you about 2 hours. 16 chapters. It's a shame you can't read it in Greek. You might be able to read it in Greek. But if you read it in Greek, you'll find it written in the present historic. It's a really nice, it's, you know, if you watch anything on television now, there's a history program. It says something like, Henry VIII is wondering what to do about his wife. Well, he isn't actually. He died a long time ago. but that is the present historic. So it takes something that's happened in the past and puts it into the present. And Mark's Gospel in the present historic opens up in front of you like watching a film in Greek. This is happening in front of your eyes. It's partly because Mark didn't actually know much Greek. He's doing his best, poor chap, but he actually finds the Greek very difficult to write. And he has one good way of writing that's actually pretty well in present tense. So he writes in the present tense, in present historic. His writing is very simple in Greek. You can probably learn all the verbs and all the nouns you need to know in 1 week of careful study. And then you can read Mark's Gospel, okay, in Greek. Except for the last chapter. The last half, the last chapter, you need to learn a considerable more Greek in order to learn those 2 further paragraphs. And for 1 paragraph you need to learn a whole heap more, and the last paragraph an even bigger amount. Because Mark does something very similar to Luke. Remember what Luke did? He leaves you hanging on the edge of a cliff by your fingernails, wondering what happened to St. Paul next. Well, Mark does something similar. The bit that Mark actually wrote ends like this. He says, the women, terrified, ran away from the tomb because. It doesn't even work in English. And it certainly doesn't work in Greek. Now, it's always changed to try and make some sort of sense of it. So in English, it's nearly always translated, the women ran away from the tomb because they were afraid. But that's not what the Greek says. It says the women, terrified, ran away from the tomb because. And that doesn't make sense in Greek. Just like it doesn't make, is it? Because what? Well, what happened next? Then what did they do? You don't know. So that's where he ended it. And people found it such a difficult way of ending that other people wrote separate endings to it. Okay? So they went back into town, they told the apostles what had happened. Then there's this, that, and the other happened, it all ended gloriously. Okay? But that's not the way that Mark ended it. He ends in this word because. Now, some people think that's because the last page of the book has got lost. But you would then, they copied it endlessly, so you'd expect it somewhere else. Some people think that he got to that word and then his mum said, "Here, Mark, it's time for tea." And he went downstairs and never got back from finishing it off. We don't know what happened. And the dog ate the last chapter. Or he might have wanted it to end like that. Because you then have to engage with what happened next. And the answer to that question is, we happened next. And the same with St. Paul. Luke gets to the end there. He leaves you on holding onto the edge of the cliff by your fingernails and saying, what happened next? Well, actually, I have to write the Acts of Father Philip. And my life is the Acts of Father Philip. Me filled with the Holy Spirit, hopefully, and writing another chapter, Acts of the Apostles. Okay, this is what happened to me. This is my witness about how the Holy Spirit worked. You have to write the Acts of, Subdeacon Gabriel, where he writes, he continues with that. So I would have people like Father Barnabas in my story, who very strongly brought me the gospel. Who knows, Subdeacon Gabriel, if he was writing his story, might have Father Barnabas and me in his story. That Father Philip was such a rascal, I just had to become a priest myself. Okay? So you have to think about it in that sort of way. And Mark's Gospel, it makes a lot of sense to end with the word because, and then you say, well, what happened next? You know, well, actually, we happened next. We are the continuation of the Gospel. In Luke, we probably think that Luke would have written, or was planning to write, 3 books, but the 3rd book never got written. And somebody else wrote the 3rd book and called it the Didache, which is the teaching of the apostles, but that book never got written. Hello, Father.
Hello.
Are you all ready and waiting to do Vespers?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to enjoy myself sitting in the congregation.
Suppose so. I just wanted to make sure I'm doing it right.
I'll come and join you in the meeting, I think. Okay? So, when I was a child, at this point, at the end of my favourite programme every week, which was Batman and Robin, know if anybody here is old enough to remember that. Just about. How did it end? It said, will Robin fall to his death? Will Batman be able to save him? What will happen next? Same time, same place, same channel, next week. Unfortunately, you won't be here.
No.
Right,
I won't ever know what happened next.
okay. Anybody learn anything new?
A lot.
Yeah. Anybody not learn anything new? Maybe this is admitting to not having learned anything new. That scallywag over there shouldn't have learned anything new. It means he didn't bother to learn anything last time. Okay? Right, there we go then. Right, God bless you, please. Hello, here you come. Okay?
Father.
If you want to take that and show it tomorrow, that's great. Anybody got anything to say?